Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're opening the files on a case that's truly disturbing, one of the most successful examples of, well, criminal duality in modern American history.
Absolutely. We're talking about the nearly three-decade reign of terror by the man who called himself BTK.
Right, operating totally undetected across these ordinary suburbs, Wichita and Park City, Kansas. It's just startling.
It really is. It's the ultimate case of the wolf in sheep's clothing, isn't it? And it just fundamentally challenges, every assumption we have about what a monster actually looks like.
Exactly. Our focus today is Dennis Rader,
Ah,
a man who, for, what was it, 31 years?
31 years. He kept up this flawless facade. Devoted husband, respected U.S. Air Force vet.
A Cub Scout leader.
Yeah.
A church council president, even. And then this almost caricature of a compliance officer.
Right, the overzealous municipal guy, all while he was systematically planning, committing, and then memorializing 10 horrific murders.
And that meticulous maintenance of normalcy, that's really the engine of our deep dive today.
Yeah.
Our mission, really, is to trace this extraordinary, almost unbelievable contrast. The chronology of the man versus the killer.
And analyze how his own overwhelming narcissistic hunger for fame, for recognition, ultimately led to his downfall, which was spectacular, but entirely self-inflicted.
We have to start, obviously, with the name, the moniker he gave himself.
Yes, and that's key. It wasn't given by the media or police like you often see. He demanded this title, BTK.
Bind, torture, kill.
Bind, torture, kill. The name itself just speaks volumes, doesn't it, about his psychological needs.
It's like a mission statement. His MO, his fantasy, delivered almost like an ultimatum to law enforcement.
It is absolute self-definition. Right from the start, Rader made it clear that recognition, and maybe even more importantly, control over the story, the narrative, that was as crucial to who he was as the violent acts themselves.
So he wasn't just a killer in his mind. He was, like a performance artist demanding an audience.
Pretty much, yeah, for his projects, as he called them. And when you look at the life he built around that staff sergeant in the Air Force, married to Paula Dietz in '71, 2 kids, Carrie and Brian.
That's the chilling part, isn't it? The sheer normalcy.
It really is. The darkness just remained totally unsuspected by his own family for the entire span of the murders, basically from 1974 right up until he got caught in 2005.
So to try and unravel this incredible deception, we really need to go back to the beginning. Rader was born in Pittsburgh, Kansas, 1945, oldest of 4 boys. Was there anything back then in his childhood that sort of hinted at the meticulous control freak he'd become?
Well, Rader often painted it as pretty conventional, standard upbringing, but later on in reflections, he claimed he felt really neglected.
Okay.
His parents, his mom was a bookkeeper, his dad worked for Kansas Gas Service. They apparently worked really long hours. And this feeling of abandonment, which, you often see as a trigger for developing narcissistic traits. It seems like it nurtured this very dark inner life where control just became everything.
And that inner life, it didn't stay inner for long, did it? It translated pretty early into actual cruelty. We see those classic red flags of a developing sadist.
Yeah.
Especially around his sexual fantasies.
Yes, absolutely. Even as a young boy, Rader apparently harbored these really sadistic sexual fantasies. They focused on women who were, quote, trapped and helpless.
Right.
And this then evolved into zoosadism, which is the practice of torturing, killing, hanging small animals. It's unfortunately a pretty strong predictor. Acting out that control, that cruelty on vulnerable subjects is like practice, laying the groundwork for later human victims.
And this cruelty then gets tangled up with some very specific fetishes.
Totally. The fetishes became the fuel, really. Voyeurism was huge for him, spying on female neighbors, trying to catch them off guard. He was also heavily into cross-dressing, often using women's underwear he'd stolen during burglaries. And then there was the autoerotic asphyxiation. He'd bind himself, his arms or neck, while masturbating. These were his private rituals, sort of the dress rehearsals for BTK, where he was both the attacker and, in a way, the victim, feeding that persona long before the first actual murder.
It's just deeply unsettling to think that all that was going on inside the head of someone who was pursuing this life of, outward authority. He dropped out of Kansas, right, but then served in the Air Force, 66 to 70.
Yep, honorable discharge, too. Staff sergeant.
Staff sergeant.
And that military background is probably key to his organizational skills. He later, chillingly, actually credited the Air Force for teaching him knowledge about sex, which, coming from Rader, you have to assume means specialized knowledge about, bondage, restraint, tactical thinking.
Wow.
And then after his service, the professional irony just gets deeper and deeper. He goes on to get a Bachelor of Science degree in Administration of Justice from Wichita State University in 1979.
Administration of Justice. The killer studying the very system designed to catch him. Did the police ever, comment on just the sheer audacity of that?
Oh, they did. They saw it as reflecting that huge narcissistic need, to be smarter than everyone else. He wanted to understand the language, the procedures of the people hunting him. It gave him this arrogant sense of security, probably.
But the biggest irony, the one that's almost hard to believe, has to be his first major civilian job, ADT Security Services.
Right. Worked there for 14 years, from 1974 to 1988.
Let's just unpack that for a second. He started working there the same year he committed his first murder. He installed alarms.
He was literally installing home security systems for people in Wichita and Park City, many of whom were specifically buying them because they were terrified of the BTK killer active in the area during those exact years.
How did he rationalize that? Selling safety from the monster he was.
It shows an extraordinary level of compartmentalization, just complete self-delusion. He could somehow separate those two realities in his mind.
It's next-level psychological shielding. And his coworkers, they even had a nickname for him, didn't they? Blue Book Man.
Yeah, Blue Book Man. Because he was so meticulous, so rigid about following the rules, the policies, the procedures.
That nickname, it just perfectly captures the conflict, doesn't it?
It really does. His public life was totally rigid, orderly, bureaucratic. And this strict adherence to external rules, it basically allowed the monstrous, chaotic, sadistic side to exist completely separately, secretly. He was practicing these obsessive-compulsive personality traits, which often go hand in hand with narcissism, making sure his public self was just unassailable.
And all this time, the cover story was perfect. The marriage to Paula Dietz, the 2 kids, the stable home in Park City. He managed to keep up this stable domestic life that basically guaranteed nobody, not police, not neighbors, would look too closely at him for decades.
It was his ultimate alibi. I mean, who suspects the guy running the Cub Scout troop? Or the president of the church council? That stability, that mundane domesticity, it provided the perfect infrastructure for his criminal life to just flourish in the shadows. But that domestic facade, it was just brutally shattered on January 15th, 1974, with the Otero family murders. This was Rader's first confirmed attack. 4 victims: Joseph Sr., Julia, Joseph II, and 11-year-old Josephine.
What really jumps out about the Otero attack, even from the start, is the planning. The methodical preparation. It contrasts so sharply with the horrific chaos of the crime itself. This wasn't some sudden rage killing.
No, absolutely not. It was a project, in his words. He confessed later he'd stalked the family for 2 or 3 weeks, learned their routines, parked his car blocks away, scaled a fence, cut the phone lines, that's standard tactical stuff, almost military.
Yeah.
Forced entry with a .22 pistol, and immediately started his bind compulsion, restraining the family with rope he'd actually pre-cut and brought with him.
He used a story, didn't he? Claimed he was a wanted man from California, which suggests he was trying to control them psychologically before just resorting to violence.
Exactly. But it seems like that pre-planned control broke down pretty quickly in favor of fulfilling those deep, dark fantasies.
Right.
Joseph Sr. was suffocated with a plastic bag. Julie was strangled with rope. But the horrific focus then really shifted to 11-year-old Josephine.
It's hard to even talk about.
It is. He took her to the basement, undressed her, hanged her from a sewer pipe, and then masturbated while she struggled. That's the moment right there where the internal BTK fantasy became external, realized violence.
And even with all that planning, he messed up immediately after. Made an error.
Yeah, a small thing, but critical. It confirms the panic bubbling under the surface of that control. He drove the Otero family car away, right? Left it in a Dillon's parking lot to mislead the police, but then realized he'd dropped a knife in the backyard. He actually had to go back to the crime scene, risking immediate discovery just to retrieve that one piece of evidence. That rush of fear right after the kill probably reinforced his need for even more meticulous planning next time.
And that planning was tested again just a few months later. April 4th, 1974, Catherine Bright and her brother Kevin, Rader called this one Project Lights Out.
Right. Broke in through a sliding glass door and, in a moment of panic it seems, accidentally fired his .22 pistol. He'd planned on being silent, presumably, but the brother, Kevin, who was 19, was home. Rader hadn't counted on that.
Kevin was forced to tie up Catherine, but then Rader tied Kevin up.
Yes, bound Kevin to a bedpost. But Kevin managed to get himself free and confronted Rader in this just fierce struggle.
His fight was incredible, really.
Absolutely heroic. Kevin got shot 3 times by Rader, but somehow managed to play dead just long enough to escape and get help from neighbors.
But his resistance, tragically, led to Catherine's death.
It did. She fought back so hard against Rader's initial strangulation attempt, apparently, that he gave up on the rope and just started stabbing her repeatedly under the rib cage. She died later in surgery. That resistance from a victim, it likely cemented Rader's preference for, pre-selected, isolated victims, people who offered less chance of survival or escape.
After these initial attacks, there were others. Shirley Relford in '77, Nancy Jo Fox later that year. And it seems like his need for validation, for recognition, just started growing.
Oh, massively. With Nancy Fox, Project Fox Hunt, he called it. He actually called the police himself from a payphone the next day to report finding the body.
That's pure narcissism, isn't it?
Totally. He needed to be involved. He needed to be the one dictating the narrative, controlling the story. The crimes themselves weren't quite enough. The acknowledgement of the crimes, that was the real payoff for him.
Which explains the letters.
Exactly. That's why, back in October 1974, he sent that first letter to the Wichita Eagle, correcting police details, dismissing false confessions, and using the BTK pseudonym publicly for the first time.
It's almost like he was grading their investigation.
He absolutely was, and his hunger just escalated quickly after that. February 1978, he sends a letter to KKTV, demanding recognition, asking, quote, "How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?" That's the voice of an ego just starved for the spotlight it thinks it deserves.
And he didn't just demand fame. He tried to inject this sort of pseudo-intellectual justification, didn't he? Claiming he was driven by something called Factor X. What was that about?
Yeah, Factor X, that was his attempt to, elevate himself, make himself seem more than just a common killer. He claimed it was this inexplicable, almost supernatural compulsion driving him, suggesting he was beyond moral control,
Trying to mythologize himself.
Precisely. By linking himself to historical figures like Jack the Ripper, he was trying to place himself in that pantheon of great, mysterious killers, validating his own importance in his mind.
Meanwhile, the investigators, they were trying to play their own game, right?
Yeah.
They traced that KK letter back to a copy machine at the Wichita State University Library.
They did. And here's that administration of justice degree irony again. The killer was literally a student at the library the police were staking out.
Wow.
KKTV even tried this psychological countermove, flashed a subliminal message on air, "Now call the chief," along with a little drawing of glasses which were found at the Fox crime scene.
Trying to lure him back into contact,
Yeah.
appealing to his vanity, his need to control.
Exactly. It became this really dangerous game of cat and mouse played out in public. But Rader, he had the ultimate invisibility cloak. His completely normal, boring civilian life.
So after that flurry of communication in the late 70s, it seems like the pressure maybe led Rader back into a dormant period, but not before one more attempted murder that really showed his fury when he lost control.
Yes. Anna Williams in 1979, a 63-year-old woman. She escaped being murdered purely by chance. She just happened to come home late that night.
And Rader was furious.
Absolutely livid, according to his own account. His meticulously planned project was ruined by a simple schedule change. He couldn't handle it. He later left a letter outside her place lamenting, "Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear?"
He even left items proving it was him.
Yeah, a scarf and some clips he'd stolen from a previous burglary at her home, just to prove he was the one who'd been thwarted. That rage over the failure, it's so revealing of those obsessive-compulsive traits, isn't it? It wasn't just about the killing, it was about the plan succeeding.
The project schedule, like you said.
Exactly. And after that failure, this really significant cooling-off period began. It lasted, 25 years? Until 2004. And during that whole time, Rader was just seamlessly integrating himself deeper and deeper into the community, perfecting the cover.
But while that public image was flawless, we know the psychological engine inside, it never really shut off, did it? Those private rituals, the sadism, the fantasy, they continued.
Oh, absolutely. He took dozens of these incredibly eerie photos of himself. He'd bind himself up, sometimes wearing women's clothing or masks he'd made, pretending to be his victims, reenacting his fantasies in the privacy of his home, often using underwear and jewelry he'd stolen during burglaries.
So this acted as a substitute, feeding the BTK fantasy internally without the risk of actually killing.
It seems like it, yeah. It fed the need without the external risk. And the depth of his civic involvement during this time, it's still just staggering when you list it out. Cub Scout leader, elected president of the Christ Lutheran Church Council.
Served on the Sedgwick County Animal Control Advisory Board.
It's the highest form of compartmentalization you can imagine. These roles, they didn't just give him a perfect alibi, they also gave him access to these environments of, like, perceived moral purity, which probably fed his own twisted self-image, the pillar of the community, masking the monster within.
But that internal sadism, it wasn't entirely dormant in his public life, was it? In 1991, he gets this job as a municipal compliance officer, basically the city's code enforcement guy, or as some people called him, the dog catcher in Park City.
Right.
And this job gave him actual legal power to torment people.
This role was crucial, I think. It was an outlet. He was described by people as just overzealous, extremely strict. He seemed to take actual pleasure in using petty rules to bully and harass citizens, particularly single women, apparently.
There are stories of him measuring grass length with a tape measure, filming people's backyards.
Yeah, anecdotes like that. He weaponized bureaucracy. He went from binding victims with rope to binding citizens with, like, zoning ordinances.
It was safe, legal sadism.
Pretty much. Neighbors talked about him being filmed in their yards. He even had restraining orders filed against him by a couple of women he apparently stalked in the 80s and another one in the 90s. So he wasn't just hiding. He was actively exerting control in these small, quote-unquote, legitimate ways, channeling that deep compulsion for dominance.
But despite that long break, the killing did resume, sporadically. April 27, 1985. Marine Hedge, Project Cookie. She lived just a few houses away from him. Why kill a neighbor? That seems incredibly risky.
It was incredibly risky. I think he was testing the limits of his cover. Killing a neighbor was the ultimate test of audacity, of control. He needed to prove to himself, maybe, that his persona was so flawless, the deception so deep, that no one would ever suspect the guy next door.
And he used his civic role, the Cub Scouts, as part of the alibi.
Yeah, he faked a headache during a Cub Scouts outing, drove off to a deserted spot to change clothes, then executed this elaborate plan, went to a bowling alley, splashed beer on himself, took a taxi home, all to appear drunk and avoid having his car anywhere near the scene.
But the most disturbing detail involves the church, doesn't it?
It does. He subdued Marine Hedge, handcuffed her, strangled her, then drove her body to the Christ Lutheran Church where he, as council president, had a key. He staged and photographed her corpse inside the church for his private collection before dumping her nude body in a remote ditch. The church itself became the stage for his most profane act.
His ability to just separate those realities,
Yeah.
it's breathtaking. And the attacks continued, even after that. Vicky Wagelo, Project Piano, September 1986. How did he get in this time?
Used his job skills, essentially. Occupational camouflage. Posed as a telephone technician. Wore an ADT hard hat. Carried a Southwest Bell manual. He even apparently went to a neighbor's house first, pretending to check their phone line just to lower Wiggle's suspicion before going to her door.
And Wiggle fought back hard.
She did. Rader confessed later she scratched his face so badly that even 20 years later he claimed he probably still had the scratch somewhere. He got really nervous, apparently, because her dogs were barking and he was afraid her husband, Bill, would come home.
So he fled quickly.
Very quickly, fled in her car, actually, and passed her husband, who was rushing home, responding to the scene. Just pure audacity and incredibly tight escapes.
His last confirmed victim, Dolores Davis. Project Dogside, January 19th, 1991. What was the cover story this time?
Used a Trapper Scout outing for his alibi. But this project also had problems. It was severely cold, apparently, which forced him to abandon a quiet entry. He ended up smashing a sliding glass door with a cinder block.
So not his usual clean approach.
No. He strangled her with her own pantyhose. But again, he was forced to leave early. Davis apparently lied and told him someone was coming over soon.
So he abandoned his full plan again. Shows the limits of his control, maybe. But
Yeah.
he still did his signature post-kill ritual thing.
Yes. Drove her body away in her car, took it to a KDOT lake, then drove back to her house and ritualistically threw her keys up onto her roof. It was mimicking a small, obscure detail he'd read about in the Otero case file years before. It was like a subtle signature, proving his identity only to himself, really. Or maybe to police, if they ever figured it out. He later went back, retrieved the body from the lake, and dumped it under a rural bridge. That small, narcissistic act, tossing the keys, it just confirmed his signature, his connection across the years. And after that, 13 years of silence.
Okay, so for 13 years, the case is ice cold. BTK is a ghost. But then, 2004, the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders hits the news. Rader sees an article, And suddenly, the man who perfected invisibility decides he wants the spotlight back.
It seems like it was just pure, unadulterated boredom and vanity. Rader himself confessed he was kind of bored with his quiet life. Seeing that media coverage marking the anniversary, it just triggered that profound narcissistic need he had to resurface, to claim credit for all those decades of his secret work.
He couldn't stand being forgotten, being just a cold case file.
Exactly. He couldn't tolerate being reduced to just an historical footnote. He needed to be relevant again.
So he starts taunting the media again, demanding attention for what he'd done all those years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Start sending letters again. He confirms the Wee Girl murder, which, remember, hadn't been definitively linked to BTK before. Sends her stolen driver's license, crime scene photos he'd taken. He even tries out a new alias, Bill Thomas Killman.
Bill Thomas Killman, BTK. Subtle.
Right. He sent a sketch to the media labeled, "The Sexual Thrill is My Bill." He was clearly treating this whole correspondence with law enforcement as, like, a game, something to amuse his own ego.
He was becoming incredibly brazen, dangerously so, escalating the communications.
He really was. He sent a package found in Murdoch Park. Inside was Nancy Fox's driver's license, and this doll, symbolically bound with a plastic bag over its head. He was dictating terms, trying to prove he was still out there, still in control.
And then he makes the mistake. The fatal mistake that proves he's basically an analog killer trying and failing to navigate the new digital world.
That's exactly it. He actually asks the police in one of his letters if a floppy disk could be traced.
He asked them.
He asked them directly. He was testing the waters. He probably assumed his knowledge of forensics from like the early 80s was still current. Law enforcement saw this immediately, recognized it as this direct appeal to his vanity, his game-playing nature, and they played along perfectly.
Yeah.
They responded via a classified ad in the Wichita Eagle. It just read, "Rex, it will be okay." Rex was another name Rader had used. They essentially gave him permission. They greenlit digital communication, knowing this was probably their best shot at catching him.
And the digital bait worked, like spectacularly.
Mm-hmm.
Rader sends a purple Memorex floppy disk to a local TV station, KSRS, on February 16, 2005.
And this right here is the turning point, where modern forensic technology just completely defeats the analog killer. Rader thought he was being smart. He thought he'd deleted the files properly. But the police forensic experts, they found metadata embedded in a deleted Microsoft Word document on that disk.
Okay, for listeners who might not know metadata forensics, what exactly did that deleted document reveal? Why was it so devastating for Rader?
Right, so metadata is basically the hidden digital fingerprint of a file. It's information about the document, not the content itself. In Rader's case, that metadata confirmed two critical things he assumed he'd wiped clean. First, the document was a church meeting agenda. And second, it showed it was last modified by the username Dennis.
Dennis?
At the computer location identified as Christ Lutheran Church.
Wow. So the one tiny technological detail, he overlooked this digital breadcrumb from the computer he used as church council president. It led them straight to the Blue Book man.
Directly. It connected BTK, the killer, straight to the identity Dennis Rader, the church council president. They cross-referenced it immediately. An internet search confirmed Dennis Rader was the council president. Surveillance confirmed a black Jeep Cherokee parked outside his house. A vehicle Rader had accidentally linked to himself earlier through some discarded trash surveillance. The net was just closing incredibly fast.
That circumstantial evidence was getting strong. Really strong. But they still needed hard physical proof, right? Something linking Dennis Rader, the family man, directly to those BTK crime scenes.
Yes, absolutely. And this is where forensic science delivered the final, unassailable blow. Police got a warrant, a controversial one, maybe for a pap smear sample, that had been taken from Rader's daughter, Carrie, years earlier at a Kansas State University medical clinic. This sample provided her DNA profile.
And the test showed a familial match. Can you explain what that means exactly? Why familial and not direct?
Sure. A direct match would mean they tested Rader's own DNA against the crime scene sample. A familial match means the tested sample, in this case, his daughter's DNA, shares enough specific genetic markers with the unknown sample from the crime scene to indicate they belong to a close relative.
So they used Carrie's DNA.
They used Carrie's DNA to establish that the unknown male DNA found under Vicky Wiggerle's fingernails belonged to a member of the Rader family, and that familial link, combined with the metadata trail from the floppy disk, was enough. It confirmed Dennis Rader was their prime suspect and gave them what they needed for the final arrest warrant.
He was arrested February 25, 2005. And that exchange with the arresting officer, It's become pretty iconic, hasn't it?
It really has. When they asked him if he knew why he was being taken downtown, Rader just calmly replied, "Oh, I have suspicions why." It showed he knew the game was up, but he was still playing the role.
Still trying to control the narrative,
Eh,
even then.
Exactly. And during the interrogation, his focus wasn't on the horror of what he'd done or his future. It was entirely on his status, his legacy. He actually asked the officer to label his drinking cup not with Dennis Rader, but with BTK before putting it in the evidence fridge. Still trying to immortalize the monster right up to the end.
So once he was charged, 10 counts of first-degree murder. The legal process moved pretty quickly, didn't it? He changed his plea to guilty. June 27, 2005. Avoided a trial.
Yeah, which spared the victims' families a potentially incredibly traumatic public trial. But his confession, it's one of the most chilling documents in criminal history, just absolutely chilling.
Oh, so?
He described the murders in this meticulous, almost clinical detail, referring to them only as projects. There was just no discernible human emotion, no remorse, only the pride, it seemed, of a technician describing a job well done.
And that clinical detached approach, it even showed up during his sentencing, right? August 18th. He gave that rambling 30-minute statement that the prosecutor famously called an Academy Awards acceptance speech.
He did, but it's the smaller things from that sentencing that really, I think, reveal his psychological makeup most clearly.
Like what?
The judge was reading out the factual summary of the crimes, just laying out the case, and Rader interrupted him, stopped the judge mid-sentence to correct minor factual details about the timing or the specific methods of his murders. Seriously, he was correcting the judge on the details of his own killings.
Yes. This pathological need for accuracy, for the record of his actions to be perfect, even while discussing these horrific acts. It just demonstrates his psychological condition in stark relief. He was focused only on the accuracy of his story, completely ignoring the devastation and horror he caused.
Which lines up with the diagnosis, right?
Absolutely. Psychological evaluations basically tagged Rader with the trifecta: narcissistic, obsessive-compulsive, and antisocial personality disorders. The OCD fed that need for precise planning. The antisocial disorder gave him the complete lack of empathy. And the narcissism required the performance, the recognition. He wasn't feeling the emotional weight of that moment in court. He was just trying to ensure the historical record of his projects was flawless.
Yeah. And even though he was convicted for those 10 murders, investigations after the fact suggested he likely stalked, maybe even planned attacks on, many other potential victims during that 31-year run. Oh, yes. Rader himself told investigators there were, quote, a lot of lucky people out there. He detailed other instances where he'd called off planned attacks at the last minute because of unexpected things, construction workers showing up, unforeseen guests arriving. It just reinforces the idea that he never really stopped planning. The only thing that kept the number at 10 was opportunity and maybe Rader's own internal sense of timing or risk assessment.
And the investigation into Rader, it isn't entirely closed history, is it? Authorities are still actively looking at cold cases linked to him, even now.
That's right. Most notably, just last year, 2023, authorities publicly named Rader as a prime suspect in the 1976 disappearance of a 16-year-old girl named Cynthia Dawn Kinney in Osage, Oklahoma.
What are the connections there?
They're geographically and occupationally pretty compelling. Kinney was last seen leaving a laundromat. At that time, Rader was working for ADT, installing alarms literally across the street from that exact laundromat.
Wow.
And it goes deeper. Rader was also involved in Boy Scout events down in the Osage area around that time. Plus, and this could be critical, his personal writings found later included the specific phrase, bad wash day. Authorities believe that might be his internal code or reference to the Kinney case.
Has he admitted to anything?
No, Rader denies involvement. But, that denial might be tactical. Oklahoma still has the death penalty, unlike Kansas during the time of the BTK murders. So admitting to another murder there could have serious consequences for him, even now.
Finally, we really have to touch on the lasting impact. The echoes this tragedy has had, especially on his family. His daughter, Carrie Rawson, she's been incredibly public about wrestling with this knowledge, that her father was a serial killer. She even published a memoir.
It's just an unimaginable burden to carry, isn't it? She has tried to maintain some level of communication with him in prison, and her report from a visit in 2023 offers this really final, sobering picture of the man now. She noted that Rader is physically rotting, basically. He's lost several inches in height, confined to a wheelchair.
So the meticulous, dominating staff sergeant, the rule-obsessed Blue Book man, He's just reduced to an old man, unhappy, confined and solitary until he dies.
Yeah, the facade has completely crumbled. The man who craved ultimate control over his life, his narrative, even his death, now has absolutely none. Rader's greatest fear, it seems, becoming obscure, losing control. That's exactly what happened. And it was the digital world, the technology he didn't understand, that ultimately ended his life as a free man, leaving him with the very loneliness and neglect he claimed drove him in the first.
So when we pull it all together, Rader's entire timeline, those decades of operational success, 1974 to 1991, followed by that catastrophic failure in 2004. The central tension is just unavoidable, isn't it? The key to his success was maintaining that rigid, ordinary life. But the key to his capture was his overwhelming narcissistic need for recognition.
He really was the archetypal predator of the pre-digital age. He thought he could just transition seamlessly into the information age. His painstaking analog planning kept him safe for 3 decades. It let him audit his own crime scenes, manipulate the media. But his pathological vanity, that deep craving to be acknowledged as this major historical killer, that's what ultimately pushed him to send that one single purple floppy disk.
His downfall wasn't a bloody glove or a footprint. It wasn't a classic forensic error at a crime scene. It was a failure to respect the power of digital technology, treating his contact with police like a game and trusting that just hitting delete would erase his identity. He was undone by 2 simple pieces of data, a username and a location, permanently embedded in a file he thought was gone forever.
It's such a powerful lesson in how modern forensics works now. Rader wanted fame, but he was ultimately exposed by metadata, this forgotten digital breadcrumb that just completely betrayed the man behind the meticulously constructed myth. His case is this unique historical marker, really. It represents the capture of maybe one of the last major serial killers who relied entirely on analog methods, only to be tripped up by the inevitable shift to digital accountability.
So maybe the final thought for you listening is about the implication of Rader's huge mistake. For your own life, maybe, or just your understanding of technology. Rader demanded credit for his evil, and digital tech ensured he paid the price for that self-absorption. It replaced his desired legacy of infamy with a life of just utter isolation, digital and physical. So the question for all of us, maybe, is this. In an age where everything leaves a trace, everything is logged, what does that desire for acknowledgement really imply about our own vulnerabilities, especially when we face the possibility of digital obscurity? Rader's vanity was his undoing. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other secrets are just sitting there waiting to be exposed in the metadata of the modern world?